The University College of the University of Maine system, together with the Maine Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Standards, has formed a partnership to make public information more accessible to Maine's employers.
So far, we've gone over, again, the recordability of H, I, and J. There are some special rules in OSHA record keeping for certain types of situations, and that's what I'm going to go over the next few slides. First off, under 1904.7, any case resulting in loss of consciousness, even if it's for less than a second, is automatically recordable, does not matter the treatment, does not matter if they had days away or days of job transfer restriction. Also under 1904.7, there are certain types of cases that are considered to be significant cases. These are cases that must be diagnosed by a provider and must always be recorded regardless of what treatment is rendered or whether there were days away or days restricted. For example, work-related cancer is considered to be automatically recordable even if treatment is not rendered right away. Also, certain chronic irreversible diseases such as asbestosis, byssinosis, etc. Once there is a diagnosis, it must be recorded automatically. A punctured eardrum is considered to be an automatically recordable case. And finally, any fracture, crack, or chipped bone or tooth. I mentioned earlier the situation with the hard hat where the guy chipped a tooth. That is automatically recordable because it is a chipped tooth. Just to follow up on what I mentioned earlier, for cases with no days away, no days restricted, and they qualify under column J, in other words, the employee received medical treatment beyond first aid, you place a check mark in column J, you leave columns H and I blank, you leave columns K and L blank, and enter only one and only one check mark in one of the subcolumns of column M, which I discussed earlier. A common question that I get, especially from the medical community, is what do I do about needle sticks or sharps injuries? And OSHA has some very specific rules on how to properly record needle sticks or sharps. Specifically, you are required to record all needle sticks and cuts from sharp objects that are contaminated with another person's blood or other potentially infectious material. It does not matter what the treatment was. If there is a needle stick or sharp object contaminated with another person's blood or other potentially infectious material, then it must be recorded. Now, 1910.1030, at the beginning of that standard, has a definition of what is considered to be other potentially infectious material. And OPIM includes fluids such as semen, vaginal secretions, cerebrospinal fluid, synovial fluid, pleural fluid, etc. Again, those types of fluids are defined under as OPIM under 1910.1030. Please be aware that these cases are subject to privacy protection. Any needle stick or sharp object contaminated with another person's blood or OPIM is subject to privacy protection under 1904.29. And also, needle sticks and sharp cases must also be recorded on a sharps log. An example of a sharps log is included in your handouts. The sharps log that is listed was downloaded from the American Hospital Association. However, you can develop your own sharps log, or if you go into Google or Yahoo, you can and type sharps log, you can print out one of those. The concern on the sharps log is a description of the incident, but more importantly, the make or the model of the sharp involved. What was the problem with that particular hypodermic needle? What was the make and manufacturer of that hypodermic needle, for example? If the incident is a blood splash and not a needle stick or a cut from a sharp object, you do not record the case unless it results in a diagnosis of a blood-borne disease, such as hepatitis or HIV. The fancy term is seroconversion. If there is a positive seroconversion, it is automatically recordable. It would also be recordable if the case meets one or more of the general recording criteria. If the case results in 1 or more days away from work beyond the day of the injury, 1 or more days of job transfer or restriction beyond the day of the injury, or the case results in medical treatment beyond first aid, as I discussed earlier. If that's the situation, then it would also be recordable. Please be aware that any blood-borne case resulting in a disease, in other words, any positive seroconversion, is subject to privacy protection under 1904.29, and as I mentioned, it must be recorded. It would fall under M6 if it did result in a blood-borne disease. However, the initial injury would fall under M1, an injury. The next slide deals with 1904.9. Certain types of cases are automatically recordable if there is a medical removal incident involved. Please be aware that if an employee is medically removed under the medical surveillance standard requirements of an OSHA standard, you must record this case. For example, an employee has a very high blood or urine count of lead or cadmium, dangerously high, so that the employee needs to be removed from that workplace. It must be recorded. The case could either be recorded as a case involving days away from work or days of restricted activity. However, if the case involves voluntary removal below the removal levels required by the standard, the case need not be recordable. The next slide, I will be discussing how to properly record cases resulting in a hearing loss. OSHA has a very detailed definition of what cases are considered to be hearing loss cases. Under the record-keeping rule under 1904.10, you are required to record all hearing loss cases resulting in a standard threshold shift of 10 decibels or more from original baseline, and the employee's total hearing level is 25 decibels or more above audiometric 0 in the same ear. You enter a check mark in column M5, as I mentioned earlier, for hearing loss cases, and please be aware of some of the special adjustments due to aging, which are detailed in Appendix F of 1910.95. On the next slide, I am going to go into a description of how to properly record a hearing loss case. Please take out the document that says a plain English example of whether to record a hearing loss case. The next slide, I will be discussing how to properly record cases resulting in a hearing loss. OSHA has a very detailed definition of what cases are considered to be hearing loss cases. Under the record-keeping rule under 1904.10, you are required to record all hearing loss cases resulting in a standard threshold shift of 10 decibels or more from original baseline, and the employee's total hearing level is 25 decibels or more above audiometric 0 in the same ear. You enter a check mark in column M5, as I mentioned earlier, for hearing loss cases, and please be aware of some of the special adjustments due to aging, which are detailed in Appendix F of 1910.95. On the next slide, I am going to go into a description of how to properly record a hearing loss case. Please take out the document that says a plain English example of whether to record a hearing loss case. This is the document which details how to properly record a hearing loss case. I went to a specific website, www.workplacegroup.net, and if you go to that website, you can obtain a copy of this particular document. Another special rule regarding OSHA record keeping involves tuberculosis cases. This is detailed in 1904.11. Under the OSHA record-keeping rules, you are required to record tuberculosis cases that develop after an exposure to a known case of active tuberculosis in the work environment. However, when it comes to classifying tuberculosis cases, the biggest concern is whether the case was indeed work-related. So therefore, you need to be aware that a case would not be recordable if the worker is living in a household with a person who is diagnosed with active TB. In that situation, there is no way to determine whether the case was work-related, therefore not recordable. A case would also not be recordable when the public health department has identified the worker as a contact of an individual with a case of active TB unrelated to the workplace. And then finally, a medical investigation shows the employee's infection was caused by exposure away from work. So basically, if you have a situation where there is some doubt as to whether the case was actually work-related, then it is not recordable. Please be aware that if you do have a tuberculosis case due to an exposure to a known case of active tuberculosis in the work environment, that case is automatically recordable and you must have a check mark in column M3. It falls under respiratory conditions. And be aware also that tuberculosis cases are subject to privacy protection under 1904.29, which I will talk about later on in the program. We now go back to our flow chart, which I talked about under 1904.4. We have now made a determination that this work-related new case is recordable. The next few slides, I will be going over how to properly record a work-related injury and illness with specific examples.